Welcome everybody to another live developer cast here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel. We have two for you today. Joining me live is owner of Positech Games, Cliff Harris, and owner and lead designer of Grey Alien Games, Jake Birkett. How you guys doing?
Yeah, good, thanks.
I'm fine. I suspect Jake is really tired after shipping a game.
I bet. For those of you who don't know, Jake just recently released Shadowhand, which we've been looking at on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel, and I'll probably be posting a written review probably either today or tomorrow on it. But I know you have been working on that game for a very long time.
Yeah, longer than Cliff would have liked for sure. Actually, longer than I would have liked, and and even the customers. But it's done now, so that's good.
Awesome, and we're going to be talking about that, as well as some of your thoughts on indie development as well over the next hour or so. We'll see how things go. But for those of you who don't know, we have spoken separately, I think, several times over this past year. I know, Cliff, I think we were up to like cast number 3 or 4, I think, between the two of us, and I think this is our second cast with Jake. But
yep.
It has been great talking to you guys in the past. I'm sure we're going to have a great chat today. So, I guess to begin with, for people watching this, either live or recorded, who may not know who you guys are, could you talk a little bit about your respective backgrounds and studios?
You go first, Jake.
Oh,
see, we're so British.
We're both polite British. Right, I'm going to go first. I'm going to be that guy. So, yeah, sure. So, let me see. Just a brief background is basically I was programming games as a hobby since I was a kid for 20 years. And then finally, I set up Grey Alien Games in 2005. And then I made a whole bunch of casual games for the casual portals. Not iPhone games. These were PC, Mac downloads before the iPhone existed. I did a whole load of those. I also made a game called Fairway Solitaire as a contract programmer for Big Fish Games. And years later, I made Regency Solitaire. That was a couple of years ago, and that was pretty popular amongst its players, though it was a niche title. And then I made Shadowhand actually, and that was really partly due to Cliff coming to me and going, we should make a version of Regency Solitaire that would be better for a Steam audience, and then
it would be more successful.
Yeah, more successful at the end of the day. So we came up with a theme which I thought would work, and also the turn-based solitaire mechanic, and made Shadowhand. So that's kind of got to where I am now, and I've shipped at least 11 games. I sort of lose track really, but quite a few anyway. And Cliff's very similar.
Yeah, well, our background's very similar actually. I started actually selling games and making games in 1997, but I actually started programming in 1981. Which probably sounds like prehistory for like a lot of people. And I've done loads and loads of indie games over the years, Gratuitous Space Battles and Democracy, and loads of other games. And I also publish games like Shadowhand with Jake. And in between that, I work for some big studios. I work for Elixir, and I work for Lionhead. I was a sort of AI and general everything coder on the movies. So yeah, I kind of been around forever, and now I'm currently doing a game called Production Line, a Car Factory strategy game.
Mm-hmm. I've been playing Production Line on and off, and we probably won't have the time to talk about today, but I would love to chat with you about Production Line and kind of that development, probably in a future cast.
Yeah, cool, definitely.
So when Jake and I last spoke, we talked about how Grey Alien has been, as you said, Grey Alien has been around now for, how long has it been now?
12 years, is that right? Yeah, 2005 till now, so yeah, 12 years.
Yep, and we talked about also the post, or I think the video you made about how to survive in the game industry without having a major breakout hit. And when we last spoke, it was a very fascinating talk again about what it means to run and basically manage your own indie game studio, and the fact that it's a lot harder than just making a good video game.
Yeah, big time. I mean, well, it speaks for itself. My talk was called The No-Hit Wonder, and I'd spent 11 years or something making games. None of them had been a hit. But each one, I'd got better and I had survived and moved on and so on. And even Shadowhand, it's doing pretty well. I wouldn't say it's a hit game in the sense that some indies go out and buy and you can't buy a house for their mother or something. But it's certainly doing pretty good actually. It's definitely my most successful game on Steam by far. Which is good news. But as long as it makes enough money that I can make another game, then I can keep going, and I've got a sustainable business, right? So that's the big goal for me, really.
I think in many ways that's harder than the situation most indies find themselves in, because there's so many indies that have made one game and then they've made loads of money, and then they don't make another game, or it takes them forever to make another game. And when you're doing that, it's almost a situation of luck to some extent, and there can be an element of luck. Whereas if you consistently make games that make some money, that's a sign that you're like consistently good at what you do. And Jake hasn't been lucky, in other words. But so it's kind of all skill. It's quite hard to sort of stay in the industry for that long without screwing up,
Yeah, and we have definitely seen a lot of those cases, especially on the independent side of things, where, as you said, Cliff, developer will release one really great game, and then we see nothing from them. And I've said this before, but it's a very big difference between just making one video game and actually building a sustainable company through your game design.
Well, it's such a hit-driven business these days, so that if you have a hit indie game, if you have a real big hit indie game, you can kind of retire. So then you can carry on making games that aren't so good, and like it's fine. But it's become such a hit-driven business lately that seems to be one of like the only ways to do it, to kind of like hope you hit on sort of like magic stardust, or you share the risk with a publisher, which is increasingly what indies seem to be doing.
I think VR indies are doing that a lot. There was a lot of money at least a year or two ago for VR devs, and I'm not sure the games were making any money, but they were sort of, I'll take the money, thanks, I'll make the game, and then sort of move on. But that's another factor in this industry, rapidly changing, is investors investing in things and maybe losing all their money. So luckily Cliff didn't. Well, not yet. We will see.
We don't know. No, I'm not going to. I don't think I'm going to lose any money here. I have lost money on games, and I've made money on games, and that's just publishing. That's what you do. There's no point in sobbing about it when you lose money, because it's just like share dealing or something. It's just like an investment based on what you think is a good inside knowledge as to what sells. So like occasionally publishers lose money, and that's the way it's meant to work.
Yeah, and when it comes to especially that discoverability, and as you said, Cliff, things being very much hit driven, I think it's a really good segue into the first part I want to talk to you guys about, and that is Steam Direct. As we know, I think Cliff and we spoke about this earlier in 2017. This was, I think, right before things became enacted. But one of the big changes this year with Steam was allowing anyone who spent $100 per game to get put on the Steam, versus the old ways of either before knowing someone who knew someone, and of course Steam Greenlight, where you had your fans vote. But of course that system became very much corrupted, I think, by a lot of people. Now, it's been about a year, and we've seen even more games get put on the Steam on a day-to-day basis. So again, as two developers who have been around, you've kind of got a chance to see all this happen firsthand. I just want to get your updated thoughts. Like, what do you make of Steam following the whole Steam Direct change?
It sucks.
Perfect.
Well, no, it doesn't. It doesn't.
Well, we did have a. I was going to say
go on.
about Jack's poll. We got a friend of ours, and he put a poll on Twitter asking. He said, "Players, not developers, because developers have got their own biases, right? Players, is Steam better in 2013, or when it was curated, or when it was Greenlight was around, or now, basically?" And basically the votes fell down mostly, of course, on curated, and actually, more on Greenlight than now. Certainly now got the least, although a few people did say, why, what's different now? They didn't really know about Steam Direct, so it's probably more of a thing that people in the know or developers know about. they just know that since Greenlight, for their purposes, it's being flooded. They don't necessarily realise it's happening even more now. Sorry, what were you going to say, Cliff?
Well, I mean, it does suck. There's a lot of like. It's really difficult to discuss the topic because you have to really not care what people think if you're going to discuss the topic. Because most game developers, we'll put it this way: every game developer I know, I can't think of anyone who's said anything different, thinks it's ridiculous and a bad idea and that it shouldn't have been done. Because the amount of money was set so low.
Yeah.
But you can't. I mean, I've just said it, and I think it. But generally, people won't say that because you're kind of crushing the dreams of kids who want to make a game and make loads of money. And the thing is, like, if you're a 13-year-old kid and you're making a game in Unity and you want to put it on Steam, and then suddenly Steam won't do that unless you pay like $5,000 or $1,000 or whatever. And then you've got someone like me saying, yeah, you shouldn't be able to do that. It comes across terribly. It's an awful thing to say. But, it is a business, and there are loads of people out there, and there has to be some kind of filter about who has learned their craft and has kind of put a lot of effort in and made a professional quality kind of experience when they know what they're doing. And I had loads of games that you won't see on Steam, and in fact I still sell some of them, but like I made loads of games before I made anything anyone would buy, and then I made loads of games that hardly sold any copies, and eventually I made games good enough that I could make a living from it. But I don't think the world is missing out massively, because like my first attempt at making a video game isn't on the world's biggest like video game store. But it's a bit difficult to say that, because like what I want to say is kind of like $100 as a fee to keep out spam. It's kind of ridiculous. I mean, I could spend $100 on lunch. It's just absolutely too low. If it was $1,000, people would moan, but I think generally speaking it would be a better experience for everyone. But I can imagine that the grief and the hassle that they would get under those circumstances. So I don't blame Valve for doing it.
Well, I mean, I do get the idea that creators want to create and people got to start out somewhere. But Cliff and I started out selling the games on our own websites using some third-party cart system, and that's the way you did it, or download.com and stuff. But now we do have itch.io, to sell games on. You can put the Humble widget on your own website. And I don't know, I also think having a huge quantity of these games on Steam is also bad for consumers, because it does make it hard to sort of filter through them and find things you may like and so on. And you can't sort of necessarily trust that everything that pops up in your feed, somebody at Valve has looked at it and gone, yeah, that was good enough to be on a platform and for customers to buy and spend money on. And so, I think it's a worse consumer experience. So yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? I get it. If we go out on Twitter and say the fee should be 5,000, we'll get flamed by a huge number of people. But a load of other people,
yeah, you do. I've done it.
A load of other people in the background will be going, yeah, basically as developers, agree with that, and even customers will be going, yeah, So it's a really polarizing topic, basically.
Yeah, and I know when we last spoke about it, I think I agree with you, Cliff, that the $100 just seems more like a slap on the wrist more than anything else. But as you said, it's very hard to set the price between being considered fair for everyone, or you're basically a dream killer for a lot of new developers.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big problem. But I'm incredibly unpopular on this topic. I should never be allowed to speak on it, because this is one of my things with Unity, when everyone sort of says, oh, it's fantastic, everyone can make video games these days, and I sort of think it's not fantastic, not because it sounds awful, doesn't it, but because what it means is anyone can make a really bad video game. If you really, what we want is all the content to be good, right? I mean, that's what everyone wants. Everyone wants really skilled game developers doing really innovative and new stuff and all the rest of it. And I don't know, I don't think the current situation is any better. I mean, there are other accessibility issues in terms of everyone being exposed to decent games. I mean, the games industry is still very centric around the US and around San Francisco. I mean, I will be long dead and buried before GDC is ever held anywhere else, like, you know, the main one. And you know, there's that whole issue there that is like skewed towards a particular sort of part of the world. And I think, frankly, changing that would make more of a kind of like accessibility change than opening up Steam to you know, pretty much anyone. But of course, loads of other stores are available. I mean, if you can't get your game on Steam, exactly as Jake says, you can sell it direct, you can put it on itch, you can you know, there's Humble, there's Good Old Games, there's loads of others.
I think, though, actually one thing you said is what everybody wants is decent quality games by devs, and actually that isn't necessarily true, because that's what the other movement is look, everybody should be able to make games and express themselves like being an author, a musician, or whatever. And I do get that, yes, but I think that there's a place for that, maybe, and it does definitely. It definitely causes trouble for people who are trying to be full-time devs and survive that way. But maybe we're just dinosaurs. Maybe, you know, the change is coming, and it's a democratization of all creative stuff.
We're not dinosaurs, Jake. We're the future. But the thing is, like you say, like
tech dinosaurs.
My wife's a writer, and I know about the whole like ridiculousness of you know, trying to get published and make money as a writer. And you say everyone should be able to write a book, and yeah, everyone can write a book, but if you go into your local bookstore, like physical bookstore, there's not 470 million books. You know, they curate it and they pick ones that they think are good and that people would be interested in. And you know, if I look at the science fiction shelf, it's got like, you know, 100 books or something. It doesn't have 50,000 books.
But what about Amazon? Has it got zillions and zillions of books that just don't sell on it? It probably has, right?
Yeah, well, see, obviously this is where my argument falls apart completely.
Because it's an online store, you know, that's the difference between bricks and mortar, isn't it?
Well, I think the difference is that Amazon have had a long time to build up the whole kind of recommendation engine stuff, and are not surprisingly heavily invested in it and more experienced in it compared to Steam. And I think, you know, maybe this problem will fix itself. Maybe Steam's you know, discovery queue and stuff like that will fix it. And to be honest, Steam's discovery queue now is pretty good. If you use the discovery queue, it is, if you've bought a few games, it is pretty good at recommending you stuff you will like. It's just maybe the solution is that the whole of Steam store becomes the discovery queue, because that's pretty much what Amazon is. If I go to my Amazon homepage, it's just full of stuff related to stuff I've bought.
And it's definitely tricky like that. I mean, it seems like every day now I'm just seeing like a few dozen games being released, and it's very hard, as I'm sure you two are no doubt aware of, very hard to separate the signal from the noise. I mean, I have seen some amazing low-budget indie titles, and I've seen some that are just absolutely horrible. And as... Oh, my voice seems to be going in and out. Hold on 1 second. Sorry about that. And as Oscar was saying in chat, that everything is being thrown together, and it's very hard for someone who doesn't really study the stuff to look on Steam and say, oh, this $15 game was made by a AAA developer, this $15 game was made by, you know, some random developer somewhere else, but they're both priced about the same.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, if it was easy, we'd all be doing it.
Yeah, I know.
It's a ridiculously tough market, but on the other hand, like, you know, me and Jake are old enough to remember when no one was going to like buy games online, and you know, they didn't want to use their credit card online, and
yeah, they were scared of it.
Yeah, absolutely, and it was awful trying to get people to like buy games. Steam has like made this so easy. So on the one hand, you get like a crazily big store with loads of stuff, and there are huge discoverability problems. But like, we used to have discoverability problems back in the past, and then back then.
In fact, when I first met Cliff at this meetup in the UK, and we turned up and we talked about how much our games had made. If I told him, if I'd told him the same figures that Shadowhand made, you'd have gone, oh my god, and you know, I'd have been like the best dev there, right? But now everyone's just like, yeah, whatever, and that's because a hit these days can make so damn much. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think the real key these days, more and more, could be wrong, but I think it is controlling your costs, controlling your dev time, which I failed with Shadowhand, controlling your costs, which I think we did fairly well actually, so that you can come into profit sooner from a game which does, okay in the current climate and with visibility and hard to get press and streamers and all that sort of stuff. I think that's going to happen, and maybe the costs of games are going to drop actually as a result of this, and therefore quality is actually going to suffer, or longevity or something perhaps, or it's just going to be the top 1% of devs are just still creaming it in, making their games from past revenues. Who knows?
Or you have a very publisher centric model. I mean, I know that with Shadowhand, like, it went on longer than expected, and financially this is not a sort of perfect situation. But on the other hand, like, you've spread the risk by taking money from an evil publisher.
Yeah.
And that enables games to get made that wouldn't otherwise. I mean, we both know people who are working on games published by other people now. Those games are only getting made because there is a publisher, almost always a successful indie game developer, that's made a big pile of money and thinks, okay, I can help out like other developers and take a calculated risk. Because that's cropping up a lot now. There's a lot of indie games published by other indies, and it does seem to be a model that will continue, because you only need one hit to finance 5 flops. The bad side of this is, if you try and go without a publisher, you can't survive one flop. You then immediately have to go and get a job somewhere else. That's the harsh reality of it.
I have seen quite a few indies I know recently release games, and then shortly afterwards they're looking for contract work.
Very common.
That's pretty common, or leaving the industry. So there are people leaving the industry. I mean, there are people coming in, of course, as well at the other end, and some of those will survive. But definitely some of those veterans
will be destroyed.
Yeah, I think. Well, no, it is just like a grinding mill at the end of the day.
It is absolutely a never-ending procession of idealistic young teenagers that want to make video games because they've seen Indie Game the movie. That is the reality of it.
Yeah.
And it is what it is. Like, the movie business is exactly the same. Writing is the same. I know from experience that the music industry is totally like that. That is the what do you call it? The equilibrium. The equilibrium is that most people fail and starve and don't do very well, and a few people become multimillionaires or whatever.
Mike, someone's asking you a question, Cliff.
Oh my God!
With this newfangled technology stuff.
How do you do that, Jake? Is that on the television?
It's on the chatty thing. He says.
What do you think of publishers who don't actually fund development? When they just like swoop in and kind of like, we'll promote the game, and then we'll take a chunk of the money.
They might have their place. Don't you think they've got their place?
No, Jake. I don't know. I wouldn't do it. Because I think that's. You've got to have some skin in the game. I think if you're an indie dev and like someone comes to you as a publisher and they say, okay, you've made the game, you've funded the game, you paid for the game, here's the game, I will publish it for you and take 50% of the profits or whatever. They have to have a stake. You have to get from them, and we are going to spend $50,000 on PR at the launch or whatever, because otherwise they don't care. It's just like throwing, stuff at a dartboard and seeing what sticks, because the minute it doesn't totally take off, they don't care because there's no downside. Whereas if you paid for the development of the game, you really want it to succeed because you've got a lot of money invested in it. So I think that's a much safer model as a developer, is get some money for development from a publisher. And they will do that. There's plenty of publishers out there that are funding development, and obviously then they help manage the launch and promote it and everything. So that's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, yes. Well, the thing is, no publisher's really going to ever put a game out and spend zero on marketing, because they've got some employees who are at least going to have to send an email out or something, or contact a distributor. So they never spend zero. But yes, I do agree it's better if they are invested in some way. But then they'll ask for a bigger cut. You see, if somebody said to me, "I'll publish a game but no funding," I'd make sure that it was a much smaller cut. Like, and if I felt it was worth doing, to just use their PR and reach and everything else, maybe that would be viable for me if I developed the game at that point.
Well, I'd take a slightly unusual approach to it, I guess, because what is this? It's like the fourth game I've published, isn't it? And so I haven't published loads of games, but I don't think you want to take a game that someone says, "Here, look, I've made a game. I don't know how to sell it. Can you publish it?" I don't think that works. I think that's the wrong approach. I think the right approach is when someone says, "I want to make a game like this, and blah blah blah. This is how I think I'll make it. This is how I think I'll sell it. Blah blah." And then a publisher comes in and, right from the beginning, hopefully says, "Well, I don't think you should call it that, or I don't think it should be set there, or I don't think you should do it on that platform, or I don't think you should use that artist," or whatever. You might not always agree with the publisher or take the publisher's advice, but the publisher, a good publisher, has buy-in right at the start and thinks, together we can come up with a really, successful, project here. And if you've had no input at all into any of the kind of like business decisions, you can't just swoop in at the end, throw loads of money at Facebook ads and make money. It's really not that simple. Thankfully, otherwise everyone would be doing it.
Yeah, and I agree with you there, Cliff, that if you really want the publisher-developer model to succeed like that, it's not, as you just said, you can't just disappear for 90% of the game's development, show up at the end and say, "Oh, I'm just going to contact some streamers, and, where's my cut of your profit," kind of thing.
Yeah. Because there's loads of game ideas that are awesome, and loads of games that will be made that are great, and the games are fun, and the games are interesting and exciting, and blah blah blah, and no one will buy them. So, like, if you want to make a game you're proud of, then and that's all you want, and you want to be really proud of it, and like be artistic about it, then don't work with a publisher, because the publisher will tell you things you don't want to hear, and all the rest of it. But if you want to make money, you want your publisher there right at the start. You want to make sure that they know what they're doing, and that they're involved in every decision relating to like how that game is going to get made and sold. But maybe Jake thinks I've been a pain in the neck for years, and that he wishes I came in at the end.
No, I don't. Cliff didn't interfere with the creative process in terms of telling me what to do. Just feedback. You could consider that or this, and it's generally good advice and fine. So that wasn't a problem. He was definitely very firm about schedules, but basically I just blew all those out the water anyway. So
yeah, I tried to be firm.
Yeah, it probably would have. It would have been. It was. It was very certain about what should happen, but it just wasn't possible, so it didn't happen. But it didn't interfere with the creative process, so that was good, really. I think if I'd been crap, he might have needed to interfere, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we had a design document and it described what the game was like. We did change it after a bit, didn't we? And kind of made it a more deep game.
Bigger scope, yeah. That was what killed me, but yes. It was a good idea in the sense of people saw it at a show and, really liked what they saw. And we thought, well, let's just add a few more things, a bit more here and there, increase the scope to make it deeper for Steam. And you know what? Customers have got an excellent deal from that, but I'm the one who hasn't, because it took me another year and a half. But it is a better game as a result of it.
Definitely.
All right. Now, before we talk more about Shadowhand, kind of development of that, I want to go back and just touch on one thing quickly regarding the Steam Direct and curated games platform. I just want to get your guys' thoughts. Have you heard, earlier this year I spoke with the company Jump. They're trying to do an idea of a curated platform for indie games. They kind of made like a big announcement over the summertime, and when I spoke to them, they were very interested in this idea of having a curated platform for games. So I guess my question is, do you think that could be the trend going forward? Should that be the trend going forward? That platforms should be curated?
That's a good question, isn't it, Jake? In a
Well,
way, isn't that what GOG is?
yeah, GOG's a curated platform. Humble is, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah.
I sent them one of my games. They said no. So it's true. It's true. Earlier
They
this year.
turned down a lot of games.
It was on Steam already, because it got through Greenlight. Yeah. No, actually, that's not even true. I got on Steam for a weird fluke of events. Yeah. So Humble's curated. You think about this. If there's this need for people to get creative and have arty games and everything else that won't necessarily sell, then what would those people do? They ought to really make a curated store for art games and stuff, just to make sure you don't get sort of like Nazi games in there, or do you know what I mean? So whatever, even running a blog about games you like is essentially some form of curation. So I don't know. I think it's useful for consumers to have some curation, but not necessarily. Yeah. Anyway, that's
well. I mean, Steam think that Steam curators will do that. That's clearly what they want it to do. I think I love pontificating about what Valve are doing wrong, just as like a sort of fantasy exercise. But I think the problem is, curators are set up perfectly to do exactly what the world needs them to do, in a sense, on Steam, but they have very little incentive to do it. They don't get anything from it. It might be a bit of recognition or whatever, but like I think there's definitely some value in Steam paying the popular curators, because like if you follow a curator and you have bought 15 games that curator recommends, then clearly that curator is doing a good job, and shouldn't they have like 1% of the revenue from those games or something? I don't know, but we already have a solution for that on PC, which is Steam curators. Ultimately, anyone who's going to curate needs to do it very professionally, and therefore they need to get money for it, because they need to be able to do it full time. That's the problem.
Yeah. And there's definitely an even bigger talk to be had there about the state of, again, game PR, and how much the YouTuber and stream generation has really become a major facet of publicizing and advertising your game. You mentioned earlier in the cast about things being hit-driven, and it has definitely become that way with, I think, no small part thanks to streamers and YouTubers. I mean, I've spoken to developers who said that, if PewDiePie or Markiplier didn't cover my game, we would be in a completely different, completely different situation. So it really has become a feast or famine for a lot of developers, because all you need is that one big streamer or one big YouTuber to pick up your game, and then everybody does it, and that cascading effect happens. We've seen that with PUBG. We've been starting to see that with that Getting Over It game. I'm sure we'll be seeing that with many more games in the years to come.
Yeah, I could do some big streams playing Shadowhand now.
I was playing it. That's
you
me.
were, and that was excellent, and it was very enjoyable watching you. We had Quill 18 play it, and they did. They've got nearly 500,000, so that was really good. And a few have, sure, but there's many more out there, and we want them to contact us and play it, or just play it, buy it and play it. Who knows?
It can be quite surprising how long it'll take for a streamer to pick up on a game, and sometimes you see a game and everyone's streaming it, and you think, that came out like 2 years ago. It's like someone will pick up and they'll do a stream, and then everyone will be like, oh, that looks really good, I'm going to cover that on my stream. So I mean, I still have people that sort of go, oh, I've just done a stream of Democracy 3 and blah blah blah, and they'd be quite popular, and I think that it came out in 2013, like what on earth has happened? So it's not that correlated with the launch, unless like you have all this sort of sponsored stuff. It's whenever someone famous happens to come across your game, because they're always swamped with indie games. It's very hard to sort of get through that. And I always think that when we send streamers a copy, it's what can you say that makes you stand out from the other 100 emails they got that day from people who are just doing my first indie game. It's very difficult to get the attention of those people, which, like you say, it makes it a bit of a lottery.
Yes. Do you have anything to add, Jake?
No, I think that's fair play. We just need more streamers to play our game, please, right now.
The thing is, it should. I think it should be quite a good streamable game, right? Because when you watch people like live stream it, it's actually really funny and interesting because, like, when you play this game on your own and like you miss a card that you could have taken, it's just like, oh. But when there's like loads of people in a stream who are all sort of screaming, "No, 9!" It's kind of. It works very well, and everyone has an opinion on, like, what card you should play and what power up you should use and stuff like that. So it actually works really well as a kind of like live stream game. So I think that's all you need. You just need like one person to do like a popular live stream of it. Well, we've had a few, but even more, and then people will realise the kind of game that it is.
Yeah, I was enjoying watching you play it, Josh, because it's almost quite relaxing, watching you go through the cards, because you're quite fast. You don't ponder the decisions for long, but you make good decisions, and you've got interesting strategies. So I'm sort of enjoying watching those, and you're getting ever so close, and then restarting. But you're not like raging over it. You know it's RNG, and I like watching you sort of go, "Give me a 9," and and maybe you get it, and maybe you don't, and it's kind of, it's good that you've embraced the fact, it's a card game, it's RNG, that's part of life. You sometimes get lucky, you sometimes don't, but you're not sort of throwing your toys out the pram about that. And that's good.
Nice. Yeah, I wanted to try and finish the game on horror before our chat today. I think I'm on chapter 16 right now.
Ooh, okay, yeah.
So maybe I'll do another stream or two of it over the week and see if I can get it all wrapped up.
It's going to be tough near the end, I'm just warning you.
Then I'll start throwing things around at that point.
Yeah.
I only did it on normal, and by the time you get to like level 21, you're thinking, you need to be absolutely sure all the gear you picked for each battle is absolutely right. Do not use a single like special card in the normal level. Save them for the duels, because the duels are really tough. But it makes it really good. It's really nail-biting.
It should be possible to beat them with using jokers and stuff. Meanwhile, I mean, to be honest, it's only the bosses you've got to save stuff up for. The ones in between, some of them are deliberately trash mobs. Some of them are, you should be able to beat them actually almost every time, and other ones will give you a 50-50, which means you won't need to replay many times. But some of the bosses are always pretty hard, but not impossible. They have been tested, So
the one that drove me crazy was Rich Turnpike, and I remember sending these really late night Skype messages to Jake full of swear words, going like, "This is impossible," and then eventually I've done it, I've beaten him.
But I have actually made him easier now.
Yeah, you did after that. Yeah,
I reduced one of his defenses because it was too limited in the scope of what you could battle him with, so I got rid of one. But there are balancing tweaks I'd like to make based on user feedback, and also listening to people on the forums and so on. I mean, I've got to be careful because the forums are a vocal minority, and I can't do every single thing everyone says you should do, because often it's a bad decision or has knock-on effects or whatever. But if enough people say the same thing and it makes sense, then I'll probably get around to doing it. So I think it would be a better game in a few more weeks with a few rough edges ironed out, sort of thing. But that's, I've got to find the sort of time and energy to do that in this post-launch slump, which is a very real thing that we get, because you crunch so hard, do these 80-hour weeks or whatever. I was up till 6-7 a.m. every day working, and then sleeping in the middle of the day, and you're very tired after you release that game. And I think even you've worked very hard, haven't Cliff? And do you feel a slump afterwards?
Well, not really, actually, because I'm used to doing everything. So I'm used to coding the game and then doing the PR and the stuff. I'm kind of used to this ridiculous thing where when you finish the game and you sort of think, "Oh my god, I've pressed release," that then you realise that that's like halfway, and then you have to like keep sprinting and running, and there's just like an endless spreadsheet of people you're emailing and asking and chasing and talking to, and it just kind of goes on forever. There's no recovery period.
I just did a marathon, you see, and at the end it was like, well, good job, Jake, but you've got to run another few miles now. And that's what it feels like, and that's the bit where you're like, right, I've got to do some more PR, I've got to respond to some more forum things, and I've got to do some more tweaks and stuff. It's all got to be done, of course, and I knew it has to be done, but I wouldn't mind just like playing Mario for a week.
Yeah.
I would like to play Mario for a week too, but I don't have a Switch.
It's very good. I played it last night for the first time with my son. It's very good. An excellent game.
Nice. But I think that is a perfect segue to talking more about Shadowhand. I know we are about, I think, like 37 minutes into the actual cast. So I know you guys probably have to get going like the next 30, 40 minutes. So I think with that, let's move on to Shadowhand, because I think we can easily, fill the rest of the cast talking about it. So we've been mentioning bits and pieces of it throughout the stream so far. But for people watching this who are brand new, what is, I guess, the elevator pitch for Shadowhand?
I guess, should I do that then? What is it? It's an RPG card game which uses a modified solitaire to drive turn-based combat. It's set in 18th century England, and it features a highwaywoman who's sort of actually a bit like Robin Hood. She's really good, really, and she's sort of rooting out corruption and evil. And so it's a cool kind of swashbuckling yarn with a historical setting. But what's very novel about it is that whole solitaire-style turn-based combat, which has never been done in this way before. Very much like Puzzle Quest or something, which I can name drop because it's not on an advert. So, and it's hard. It is quite a hard game. Deliberately, it's not a sort of casual, well, just click a few cards. Some people think it's like that when they play the first few levels, but of course I've had to introduce the concept, and then it ramps up beyond there and does, rapidly get to be quite a deep game with a lot of strategy and a lot of thinking and a lot of retries when you don't get the cards you want. So that's a kind of elevator pitch, I guess.
Yeah, that's a long elevator.
Yes.
That's like Freedom Tower elevator or something.
Yeah.
So, as we said earlier in the cast, Cliff was kind of the one who suggested to try and take things forward, like in terms of that kind of design. Could you talk a little bit more about how Shadowhand, I guess, grew?
Sure. I mean, actually, as well as Cliff, Ichiro, who popped on the stream earlier, he's another dev, Boston-based. He said you should definitely get Regency Solitaire. He loved it, and he said you should try it again with some other kind of theme which will appeal to Steam. And I think Cliff had said the same thing to me. So that's two developers I respect saying the same thing. And it was actually Cliff pitching his services as publisher to me rather than me to him, which is unusual. Normally developers have to scrabble around to try and find a publisher. But
it's so long ago, I can't remember if that's true. But if you're saying it, I suppose it must be.
No, it is. You said to me, why don't you do this? And I was like, well, the problem is it's still a solitaire game, whatever, And we were like, well, it has to be. I think my wife, you see, she came up with the idea of doing a prequel, rolling it back in history and having a highwaywoman. And I'm like, yeah, that's a great idea. So that lends itself naturally to combat. But how could combat work with solitaire? How could it work? And I recently given Darkest Dungeon a good play. A friend of mine made that, and it's a fabulous game. And one day, almost fully formed, the idea came to me of two players playing over a deck of cards like Puzzle Quest or something, and those charging up the weapons and how they would attack each other. And I was sort of able to play through the game in my own head actually for a while to check that concept worked. And then without even prototyping, I pitched that to you, I believe, Cliff, and you were like, yeah, sounds good, let's do it. And then we did, as contracts were signed, I prototyped it and it did work. We tried it at shows and people loved it, and we knew we were onto something. And that's when we decided to expand the project and make it bigger, more RPG like, more cards, more enemies, more locations, but that's kind of how it came about. It was a prequel to Regency Solitaire for the Steam audience. That's specifically what the market we were aiming for. Like, it's not going to be sold on the casual portals, it's not coming out on mobile, it's just a desktop game. So
it's interesting because Regency Solitaire, it looks very much like a casual game. It was like a sort of a Big Fish Games style game, but it was interesting because so many developers we knew who made quite serious, games like dystopian games and like sci-fi games or horror games or zombie games, they got really into it and would tweet about it and stuff, how they were completely addicted to it. So it kind of became like that sort of Harry Potter phenomena where there were adults reading Harry Potter with like a different jackets because they didn't want to be seen that they're reading Harry Potter because they're grown up. And it was kind of like, it was a game that like a lot of hardcore gamers were playing as kind of a sort of guilty secret, I think. Because obviously the mechanics were really good and it worked really well. So it's kind of obvious to think like, you know, if you can make a version of that sort of game that with a theme that is more Steam friendly, then it should do very well. And yeah, you know, then it got expanded a bit more, but it's still taking the core like approachability of something like Regency Solitaire and bringing it to a completely different marketplace.
The other factor, sorry Josh, we should mention is that Regency Solitaire, although it wasn't a hit on Steam, I mean, it got talked loads about after it came out on Steam, but it's only a mild, you know, very mild success on there, but it had already been actually really quite a big success on the casual portals, so Big Fish Games, iWin and Gamehouse, and it had made definitely most of its money there, not on Steam. So in a sense it was definitely a proven product, and that you know, it was a solid, fun, slick gameplay experience. It just didn't sell very well on Steam. So we knew that, and the fact that we knew that non-casual gamers who played it actually really liked it, if they were able to, if they either liked Jane Austen theme or didn't care but were okay about the mechanics, and we knew we just had to reach that bigger audience, and so I think it was a good business decision. Yeah.
Yeah, but I know.
Suppose it's kind. Sorry. No, go on. You go. I'll shut up.
Oh no, I was just about. I was just about to talk about what meant to make the game Steam friendly, but finish your thought, Cliff.
I was going to say it feels to me that it's kind of like pitched halfway between like Regency Solitaire and Darkest Dungeon, and because we were talking recently about the kind of people that would like Shadowhand, and it occurred to me that it's kind of like a little bit like Darkest Dungeon, but not quite as depressing, because like I love Darkest Dungeon, which is a brilliant game. But I just feel like I want to slash my wrists when I'm playing it. Like everyone's like, "Oh, I have great fear and paranoia, and now I've died," and I sort of think, "Oh God!" But it's you know it's kind of like that, but if you're feeling fairly upbeat, I think that's how I describe it. I think.
Yeah, earlier in chat we mentioned you could call Shadowhand the Dark Souls of solitaire games. Maybe you should just call it the Darkest Dungeon of solitaire games, and there we go.
That's true.
We should totally do that. Yes. Well, you can't do that. You can't name someone else's IP. I don't think.
No, they might let me though. They're my friends, so.
Yeah, they're pretty cool about such things.
Now, one thing I know Oscar asked earlier about RNG and skill, and that was actually a question I wanted to bring up in a few minutes. But keeping with this idea of making Shadowhand Steam friendly or appealing to Steam, I know when we last spoke, Jake, we brought up that very topic. But I guess over the course of last year with developing the game, what have you guys found to be, I guess, quote-unquote, Steam friendly for any developers watching this?
What you mean, a sort of game that would sell on Steam?
Yeah.
Well, okay, yeah, I've sort of just answered that a little bit in the chat. So, basically, you know, there aren't many casual gamers on Steam. So if you make a sort of casual game, I think it's not the best market for it. People may turn their nose up at it and so on. Any kind of game, this would be more of a list of what not to put on Steam. Any kind of game that was on mobile, putting it on Steam is a bad idea, or launching on both. Not always. Some developers have had success, but I think the feeling is having a game on mobile as well devalues the desktop version, because you can't really sell the mobile version for more than $5 tops. And then if you're trying to sell a $15 desktop version and people know about it, I don't know. I don't think that's great. But for us, it was just, look, the theme clearly has to be darker, less romantic. But, you know, again, we've had other games come out recently. What was that dungeon? There was some kind of romancing dads or sort of thing.
Oh,
do you remember that one?
Dad Simulator.
I think it was gay dads dating or
it
something.
It didn't actually say gay.
No? Oh, well, I thought maybe they were. But anyway, the point was it sold
Dream
massive.
Dad or something?
Daddy, Dream Daddy,
so
I think.
All of this, all this stuff I'm saying, take it with a pinch of salt. You know, I wouldn't have thought to make that game, and it did amazing. But for us, it was like, okay, darker theme, sort of deeper mechanics, you know, this RPG sort of depth and content. That was really what I felt. a lot of the Steam crowd wanted. I mean, I say Steam crowd, but don't forget, most people on Steam, most of them, just play Dota or CSGO or Football Manager, actually, and they don't play any indie games at all. I think it's only like, 1 or 2% of their people on Steam actually even buy indie games. So then it was a case of, how can we appeal to those? And those people are often curiosity seekers. I remember Dan Cook mentioned that to me. And so that's why they buy indie games and something different. And Shadowhand is something different. It's got the dark theme, it's got something familiar, solitaire, it's got also something else familiar, RPG, but it's been mashed up, which hasn't been done before. And so that appeals to curiosity seekers.
Well, see, what I like about the design for the game, which I think is very clever, is when I'm playing it, I feel like I'm some like cool indie game player who's playing some cool thing with like, highwaymen, and it's like a deck building card kind of, that sort of thing, which I don't normally play. And I wouldn't normally play it because I think, oh god, I don't know how to work out all the different cards and what they do. But because the main mechanic is solitaire, I kind of already know how to play it. So it's kind of like brings all the kind of sort of hardcore stuff that is really cool about those sorts of games, but makes it a bit more accessible, I think, which I think is very clever, because when I look at a lot of these games like Hearthstone, I think, oh my god, I don't know what's going on, and I feel like I'm sort of scared off it. Whereas you've kind of like wrapped that in a more accessible mechanic, which I think should do incredibly well if everyone buys it.
Yeah. Well, and word of mouth. One thing we've looked at on the Steam stats you can see is concurrent players. And that's simultaneous players, and that's not going down. It's just this sort of constant batch of people just playing it. And if you look at the reviews, they're all people playing it large numbers of hours. One person had logged like 90 hours or something. I thought, how's that even possible since launch?
Yeah, I know.
How is it even possible? And the median playtime on the Steam back end is high. It's well over 2 hours, which is actually very high for an indie game or any game. A lot of people bail out a lot sooner. I mean, it's sort of telling that any negative reviews, and we don't have many, but they're all very, very short play times, like 30 minutes or something. So someone that just bounced right off the sort of casual-esque solitaire at the beginning and didn't even get to anywhere, they didn't even get to the first course, let alone the main meal. Do you know what I mean? So.
Yeah. And speaking about that, I would definitely want to touch on the RPG design of Shadowhand, because that, as you said, Jake, is like one of the more interesting aspects of the design and the new feature of Shadowhand compared to Regency Solitaire. And for those of you who missed the first look or the streams that I did, the combat side of things gets very involved, especially when you get to, like I was mentioning this on Twitter, about like chapter 10 or 11, when enough gear opens up that you really start to put things together. So I guess my next question for you is, I guess, how did things develop in terms of creating the RPG side of Shadowhand?
Okay, well, I'm a big RPG fan. I mean, I've played them for years, Baldur's Gate, Skyrim, Darkest Dungeon, loads of stuff over the years. So, I love all that sort of stuff. Well, and Dungeons and Dragons on paper back in the day as a kid, right? In fact, I used to design my own dungeons, as many kids did, and rule books and systems. So it was kind of nice to put all that into action. But what Helen and I did was we came up with, and I remember I was playing Dark Souls 2 early in the development of the game, and that did make me think about the systems a bit more. The things like the piercing and the stunning and the bleeding and stuff like that, and then having defenses for all of those. So a lot of it's fairly standard RPG stuff in that sense, but what we did is we tried to tie them to outfit items which made sense. Some masks help protect you against fumes and stuff like that, and hats deflect things, and capes help you deflect things, and so on. So to a certain extent, I mean, ultimately you can't be ultimately totally realistic with such things, but we did try to come up with novel items and novel things. We've got the diseased rat in there, we've got the leeches, the soap as well, which
yes, the soap.
And the handkerchief.
You didn't realise, did you, until I did it and told you that there's a bit where you're attacked by a dog, like a vicious dog, and you can disarm the dog using the soap, which is brilliant because when we did it, I was playing it with my wife and we thought, well, and she said, well, let's use the soap, and I'm like, well, it's a dog, and she's like, well, it's a weapon, and I thought, okay, because it was quite a tense battle as well, and it worked, and I thought, well, yeah, we've thrown soap at the paws of the vicious dog, and it's kind of skittering about the place while we stab the guy.
Or it's eating it. It might, yeah.
Well, as you know, I think that you should be able to throw the pie at the dog, but you have to code that.
Yeah,
and you probably wouldn't waste a pie on the dog, would you? Because it's a good power.
Well, the interesting thing is, if you're attacked by soap in the game, you can use a handkerchief.
Yes.
You can use a handkerchief to clear the soap, right? Get your weapon back. Now, the coachman didn't have a handkerchief, but if he did, he'd have to be like swabbing down the dog to like get the dog functional again in order to attack you.
Well, the whole game has like things in it like this that are kind of faintly ridiculous. I mean, the whole idea of like when you're describing the game, saying if you're attacked by the soap. I love it, and I love the fact it's such a British game.
Yeah, it's not deadly serious. It is, of course, we put our own references and jokes in there, and we make fun of the genre and all that stuff, and ourselves as developers, everything really. But a lot of it, you're right, you've discovered this soap is emergent. So I'm finding, even from watching you, Josh, and other people, and hearing stuff on Twitter, Steam forums, people are coming up with combinations of techniques that I hadn't even thought of, that I'm like, whoa, that's a really good idea actually. And I knew that they would do that. The Darkest Dungeon guys told me, people will come up with weird combinations, and you might have to go back in and nerf them or whatever, or you can keep them and let them feel clever that they found that, as long as it doesn't spoil the gameplay. So that's what's really interesting about this sort of game, is you've got not only the standard turn-based RPG mechanics, but all the card mechanics as well. People think, oh, you just click one card higher or lower. No. It's very important which cards you click, which order you click, what's underneath them, which cards you blast off, which cards you leave behind. There's so much to that.
What gear you equip.
Yeah. It's just whole layers of stuff that I think there's a lot of skill layers that people haven't even reached yet, and they don't realize.
There is a surprising amount of skill towards the end of it when it gets very important. If you're trying to reach the really high combos, because sometimes you need to reach a combo of 40 at one point, which is kind of insane. And when I was playing it, we were like, exactly. And we were sort of sat there almost doing statistical analysis, kind of thinking that, like, I know I need this, and then I could get that revealed that. That's got like a 50% probability of being that, and you end up taking a long time to play a card because it's so important. And I think that's what people who bounce off the game don't realize. They think it's just a simple numbers matching thing, and actually it gets very complicated because of all the kind of extra mechanics that get added. It's a surprisingly strategic game, I think.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Last night, I think after I turn off the stream, I did the chapter where you're doing the fisticuffs with a guy in the barn.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And the overkill challenge, that took a little bit of luck on my part to get that one to go, because you have to get, for those who don't know, to get overkill, you have to hit the enemy for more than what their health is and drive it below 0, but you need an overkill of 8. So you have to time it so there's enough cards on the field to get a high enough combo, and to eat through the guy's remaining health and eat through their armor as well.
Yeah, it's pretty tough. I knew it was tough when you were playing on hard mode, but well done for beating it. There's actually a small bug on that on that chapter. One of the gold goals is ridiculously impossible. I think the gold star goals, and it's because I typed a number in the wrong place in the function call, and somebody spotted it, and I fixed it in an update, so it will be coming soon.
But the overkill is very clever, I think, because I remember being in a very difficult battle towards the end. We needed an overkill of like 18 or something ridiculous, and we were in this situation where we could easily have killed the enemy, and we had the weapon charged, and we had an attack bonus, we had everything, but we had to go, no, we're just gonna pass and let them have another go because we don't quite have the overkill, which is kind of really distressing, because if they then get a run and they kill you, you feel like an idiot, but like we absolutely had to get it. So it's a very difficult, like, tactical decision at that point, which is brilliant. Works really
well. It is
a
harsh game because you can.
Yeah.
Okay, sometimes the luck of the cards mean you get an easy win, great, and other times you luck of the cards mean you lose. But sometimes you can invest a lot into a really, it's a close match, and you invest a lot of thinking and strategy into this win, and you think I can do it, and then you just get that one bad card, and then it's your tower collapses. But other times you get it's just right, and you pull off that complex sequence, and it's very rewarding when that happens. So I was trying to balance the game such that could happen more often than the two extremes, because it's more rewarding to have a close match that you win through skill and sort of grit, really.
Yep, and that's one of the tricky aspects of Shadowhand. I think that's a perfect time to bring up the question Oscar asked earlier, one that I was thinking about before we started, and that is balancing. That is perfect time. He just said in chat about RNG versus skill, because as both of you said, Shadowhand is a game about drawing cards from a deck. That is RNG, personified. And to clarify for the cast, you mentioned this, I think, either on Twitter or on the Steam forums, but Shadowhand is 100% RNG. Like, there is no behind-the-scenes manipulation, right, for either you or the AI's benefit.
Let me answer this carefully. No, I mean, the deck is basically a deck of cards. It's a real deck. People didn't even think that, but it's a real deck of cards that's been shuffled. I mean, it's modified. It's got 60 cards, not 52 and so on, that are shuffled and put in those fixed positions. And so in that sense, it's very, very random. The AI has an intelligence rating, and sometimes they fail their intelligence test, and so they don't do a sensible move, and that's where you've got an advantage as a player. You can always sort of get ahead of them there, and you can add stats into your finesse, which means that you can actually cheat the deck. So in that sense, you could cheat it. But in terms of all the other stuff, like whether you hit them or not, whether you cause bleed or so on, that is just pure 25% chance, and you can actually fail 10 times in a row, and it feels bad, but that's random numbers
right here. Yes.
But I think one key point is that if this was a game where you had dice rolls instead of cards, you would just basically be rolling the dice, and the outcome you have zero control over unless you're some kind of specialist gambler in Vegas who's got weighted dice, right? So with the cards, okay, the layout is random, and what you're going to get next is random, but all your skill as a player and all your stats and your choice of gear, that's what tilts it in your favor over the AI. So the AI looks stronger, and a lot of people are like, hey, they've got better weapons, better armor, better defense. This isn't fair. And it's like, use your brain. That is what makes the difference between you and them, and the ability to win. It's your brain and your skill, basically. And I think that means it's more interesting than just dice, right? So anyway, I don't know if that answers some of the question.
Well, the question I wanted to get to is what Oscar and I were saying earlier regarding balancing the RNG with these skill aspects. Because, as we said, a major part of Shadowhand, especially once you get to the later half of the game, is the battles becoming more puzzle-like. For those of you who haven't seen any footage yet, you start to run into enemies with a lot of very specialized defenses. Like, you'll fight one person who has 50% chance to resist pierce, but no chance to resist stun, or vice versa. Or the enemy will have an advantage against tool-based weapons, and so on. And what happens is that you start to run into a lot of different factors that begin to basically become a part of playing the game. It's not just, as we said earlier, it's not just you picking cards from this deck and playing them down the field and that's it. There's a lot of pre-planning that goes into things with the synergies of your weapons, with your special abilities, with your gear. And as we said, a lot of the gear and items in the game have a percentage chance. For instance, you have various swords that have 20 to 25% chance to bleed, or a dagger that has 50% chance to pierce. So the question that I'm wondering, I'm sure Oscar's wondering as well, is how do you balance the fact that on one hand you're asking the player to make these very informed decisions or very tactical decisions of, what gear do I take, what item do I use when, but then you put that next to the fact that a lot of this stuff is pure chance. As you said, Jake, you can take that weapon that has a 25% chance to bleed, and that could be what you need to beat this boss. But what happens if after 10 swings of your sword, the guy's not bleeding? And I've had that happen a few times myself. So how do you, I guess, balance, these two, sometimes I think, somewhat chaotic forces together?
Okay, well, one small point related to that first. I did speak to the Darkest Dungeon guys, by the way, and I said, do you ever fudge the numbers, right? Because a lot of developers know that players hate RNG, or they don't understand how it works. So when something fails 10 times in a row and they're expecting it to sort of work every other time, they get annoyed. But that is random numbers. That's what can happen. And they said to me, no, they don't fudge any numbers in the whole game. It's just, it's just tough. And sometimes you get good luck and sometimes you don't. And I was encouraged by that. I thought if a game can do as well as Darkest Dungeon and sell as well as that, I mean, it's had its share of haters, but ultimately it's done great for them, that, we can do the same. So those numbers are not fudged in Shadowhand. They could be, maybe, I don't know. And somebody thinks I ought to do it and other people think I shouldn't. But how we balanced it was I actually wrote this automated test routine, which basically it puts the AI player at 100% intelligence against itself, and then I equipped it up with all the different kinds of loadouts and everything else. I worked out what kind of stats you would have as a player at that point in the game, and health and so on, and abilities, and that AI runs against the enemy, and it runs like 500 times and then outputs the chance to win based on that. And various other stats as well, and then a graph. I can look at that in a spreadsheet. It gets very boring. I look at all these big spreadsheets, and I can see the spread of losses and wins and what's most likely. And I was then balancing the battles there to either make them definitely easy or medium or hard, but always knowing that a skilled player will have an advantage on top of that. So I can make something maybe only 25% beatable based on 2 AIs, but know that a good player could do that 50% of the time or something like that. And then we test it ourselves and make sure that that's the case. And we've had Cliff raging at me about Turnpike 2 and tweaking things, and I will tweak things. I'm going to tweak the CTAR at the end of chapter 8 because there's a chance you don't have one of the weapons you bought before the chapter. If you didn't buy it, then it's a bit of a tough fight, so I might tweak that to make it easier. So it's still ongoing.
Mm-hmm. And don't.
But personally, I don't think that that random numbers, really have to be completely random. I mean, I know there is this popular thing, and and I know that they are in Shadowhand, but for example, they're not in my games. I have all sorts of fudges in there, which I completely sort of fess up to, and I don't mind it. I think what players want is they want every single random number to be completely and utterly manipulated so that they have this wonderful game experience, but they don't ever want to know about it. That's what they want. Everyone wants to win by the skin of their teeth, thinking, look at the skill, and I just about pulled it off, and you thought I wasn't going to make it, but I did it. Isn't that fantastic? And they want to think they did that by skill, but that's almost impossible to do. I mean, it's very, very, very hard to do. So I quite like it when games nudge things my way or against my way to ensure that I have a good experience. And I remember storming the Normandy beaches in Medal of Assault like 25 times trying to get off the beach, and just being furious that the developers hadn't made the bullets slightly less accurate on attempt 24 so that I could finally get up the flipping beach and see what happened.
I thought that was good though. I remember that. I thought it was so brutal. It brought home the reality of actually having to storm that beach, like the fact you would have probably died. It was quite good,
There's brutal and then there's boring. Do you know what I mean? It was brutal after 10. I thought, you're kidding me. But it gets to a point where you sort of think, look, throw me a bone here. As a player, I want to be entertained.
Well, some people I think that about Shadowhand actually about some of the fights, and that's why I'm still pondering how I balance things going forward. Do I rubber band the effects like bleeding and pierce and so on, so after X fails in a row you have a success, but it couldn't be just that simple. It would need to be a greater chance of success after X fails, otherwise you could begin to rely on that. Do you know what I mean? And you can't have developers figure this out and realize, oh, it's going to, on the sixth one, it's always going to hit bleed or something. So it has to be hidden enough that it's not obvious. And so there are a few things that I am considering to take the edge off the RNG, because, as I said, some people bounce off it, and that might make a smoother game experience. So I guess watch this space.
Yep, and Oscar brought up the game Loot Rascals, which I played, I think, I want to say either earlier in 2016 or late 2015, and for that game we ran into an issue where it was entirely RNG dependent whether or not you had any chance of succeeding. And as you guys said, there's always that line, and definitely agree that a lot of gamers really don't understand how RNG works, or just flat out hate it. I mean, Darkest Dungeon is a perfect example of that. I remember seeing threads on there of people saying, the game told me I had a 75% chance to hit and I missed 5 times in a row. Your game's broken. Go fix it. And it's just very hard, I think, for a lot of games to really balance things out. As you two just said, there are people who like to have things 100% up to chance, that you could play this game and beat every battle on your first try, it's completely easy, or you have someone who fails every battle and never gets past chapter 1. And you always run into that question of, do I want to keep it completely chaotic, or do I want to nudge things just a little bit on that back end?
I am tempted to nudge things, to be honest. There wasn't time before launch, to be honest. We had to get the game out as is and see how that goes, and to be honest, see how people feel about it, and look at the data from people's logs. When you're done, Josh, I wouldn't mind you sending me your log file, actually, which the game keeps. Okay. I'll contact you about that, because then I can analyze the results and see where things were off and if they need tweaking and stuff.
Yeah, and oh, go ahead.
Sorry, the thing is that real life kind of sucks, which is why we all want to play games, right? And real life has loads of random numbers in it. If real life could have its random numbers kind of tweaked in order to provide the most fulfilling life for me, that would be amazing. So why reject it in entertainment? I mean, if you can adjust the experience to be more entertaining, if only there was some kind of mega AI when I was watching the Phantom Menace that was oh, Jar Jar Binks is going down badly, we'll just we won't have him in any later scenes. That would be brilliant. But instead you're kind of stuck with a fixed experience, and games are unique in that we can see how they're being experienced and change it as it is being experienced. They're the only format of entertainment that can do that. So I think we should grasp that.
So Cliff, the publisher is telling me to change my game. Do you hear this?
Yeah, there we go. That's how it starts.
Yeah, but that's what I would do. But I'm saying that as from the point of view of a player, not because I think that would make it sound better or worse. It's not clear. But I'm just saying, as a player, if I suddenly found out, oh my God, all the random numbers in the games I'm playing are all fudged by the program, I'd think, well, yeah. Why not? It's a game. If I find that the mathematics is being faked in my bank account, then I'm not amused. But this is entertainment. It doesn't really matter. The purpose is for me to be entertained, not for it to be mathematically pure.
True. And as I said, I am considering these things. I'm taking it all on board, letting it percolate as I do, and then we'll see what happens.
Now, I guess, getting back to talking about balancing the RNG side, one question I have for you, Jake, is how did you, I guess, come up with the various percentages in terms of balancing probability with the, I guess, direct nature of these weapons? As in, you have a sword that has a 25% chance to bleed but does, let's say, 8 points of damage, versus, let's say, a weapon that does higher damage but may do something else. How did you balance, in terms of creating the various weapons and gear, the percentage chance with their actual utility?
Well, it was bitching and took ages and involved a lot of spreadsheets. I basically made this, big spreadsheet of all the weapons and what my gut feeling was how they might work, and then I tested them with the automated tester. And sometimes my gut feeling was pretty good. In fact, and I was actually able to put some maths behind it as well and work out how many hits that weapon would take to kill someone with X defense and Y health and so on. And then basically all I did was testing my assumptions. And sometimes I was great and sometimes I was way off. And so something like the stiletto had a much higher damage initially, but when I tested it, it just wiped people constantly, and it's because of the poison.
Yeah.
And I had to nerf various numbers and tweak things until basically the weapons were balanced. Now there's something you may not realize about this game. There are 5 groups of weapons, A to E I call them, and they're introduced at different points in the game. And it's quite important that you stop buying and using the group C weapons when the group D ones become available and so on. So did you finish chapter 16?
No, I just got to it before I decided to call it a night. That.
Oh, okay. Well, the boss has the first group E weapon, the final batch of weapons, and each of those groups are balanced with each other so that they're all comparable in terms of how they work, but they've got their own specialist little things, like bleed can help finish a thing quicker because of the number of turns can be decreased, or stun. Stun generally makes a match last a little bit longer, but it's easier for you. So it depends on what your goal is. So yeah, I balanced them meticulously against each other and tested them and tweaked them. That's how I did it.
And like for myself, I found bleed to be very effective. But, of course, as we said, there are some fights where bleed isn't that effective when you run into guys with 50% defense. And I know I was reading on the Steam forums, I think some people were complaining that one of the final group of weapons may be a little bit too powerful. I think that's one that you were just talking about, Jake, the one that's at the end of chapter 16.
Yes, yeah.
So you should talk about it, because that's Conan's sword, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, that's true. Okay, so my son, who is 16 now, when he was... God, was he 15 or 14? I'm not sure, maybe 14. Him and his friend went to Avalon, which is chapter 16, what you're in. That's a real place near us. And he went there and he spent 4 days forging a sword, in a forge, did all that stuff, and he came home with a really cool looking sword that looks like that one in the game. So he's called Conan, and we put his sword in the game, and we've given him a bit of flavor text related to that. So so that's the inspiration behind that sword. But in terms of
I think that's so cool. You are probably the only game designer that puts a +10 sword in their game that is modeled on the sword that was forged by your own offspring.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. He played the game and loved it as well, by the way. And he's a 16-year-old teenager that plays Fallout and KOTOR, and stuff like this, and shoot 'em up games. So he got really into playing it and min-maxing everything. But that sword may be a case of being needing to be nerfed, and I tell you why. Because the automated tester told me it needed to be this balanced, and we tried it and thought, yeah, that's pretty good. But players are managing to get really big combos because they've really figured the game out, and therefore it becomes slightly overpowered. So it may need nerfing. But you know what? It's really fun getting those big combos and feeling powerful. So it's a case of, do I leave it in? It's really fun and different. So there's some colour and flavour to the game, or is it spoiling the enjoyment? And one person's enjoyment is another person's sort of, not enjoyment, not fun. Yeah. So tricky.
Well, it's an interesting topic, the whole thing, because like you were saying, that the game has logs of how people have played, but they're just left on people's computers, and we can design really very well balanced, very cool games if you can harvest data from everyone who plays them, because it is incredibly valuable to know how everyone is playing the game. And obviously, there's a privacy implication there, but I'm just talking about anonymized data. But if every single game of Shadowhand that had ever been played, can be put into a database and analyzed, you find things like that really quickly. You don't have to rely on players to go, oh, this is overpowered, or that's whatever. You can spot that even before the player base as a whole has spotted it. And I think people should be quite accepting of that, because it's done just to make the experience better. I think the problem is that a lot of advertising companies and a lot of dubious companies want to kind of like harvest everyone's information, but I really would never care about any of my play sessions of a game being analyzed by the designers. It's a brilliant tool for game balance.
Well, for my beta, it did send me back the logs, and people had to agree to that. But now it does record the logs, but they're not sent to me. But I can ask people for them. So I will be asking people who beat the games to send me their logs, so I can just double check their stats against my beta tester stats, and just see if there's anything that needs smoothing out, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's very interesting, as we said earlier, with something like Darkest Dungeon, or with any game where the player gets the ability to control, what skills or weapons they bring in. As we said, you're always going to find people who discover those tactics, who figure out, if I do X, Y, and Z, this is the best possible outcome I can get from playing your game. And it always becomes that risk of, do I leave that in, or do I remove that? Because I'm trying to remember off the top of my head cases of developers removing it, and I'm not thinking, I can't think of anything really good off the top of my head like that. But it's always a risk, especially when you have strategy or tactical based games, because things are laid out very cleanly and very neatly for the player. Like, excuse me. Like, for instance, when I was building up my strategy playing Shadowhand the other night, I started to put the pieces together saying, okay, this outfit gives me +2 C weapon damage. So let me find my C weapon stuff. Okay, put that on. But wait, let me put something on that gives me a greater chance to bleed. Let me grab that item. And you start putting these things together, and it creates very optimal builds and very powerful strategies.
Yeah, but those ones I have thought most of those out and tested those. But there are some weird little edge cases that I can't capture everything, and that's what I'm almost reliant on players to sort of let me know about. But if I remove them, they may be annoyed, you see. So, because they're pleased they found it. It depends whether it's a game-breaking exploit, you know what I mean? And if it's just like an advantage, that might be okay, I think.
Yeah. But of course, trying to figure out what is and what isn't, though, that's a very tricky decision.
Yeah, well, that's down to me at the end of the day, I guess, as a designer, so...
Now, I know we've certainly gone over our hour. I think we're, in terms of the actual stream, we're about like an hour 15, hour and 16 in. So I'm sure you guys have to get going in a few minutes. So I have a few, I guess, remaining questions for Shadowhand, and then we'll wrap things up. But again, if you guys are free in the future, it'll be great to have you back on.
Yep, sure. Cool. Let's wrap things up then. What have you...
And for you guys watching this live right now, this will be officially last call for any Shadowhand related design questions. So, I wanted to touch on the extreme example of Shadowhand. Again, the difficulty side of things, because I find this very fascinating. As you said earlier, Jake, and I'm sorry, both of you guys have said this, from the outside, Shadowhand looks like a very casual game. It looks very much like Regency Solitaire, or even just Solitaire in general, that you're just, pulling cards from a deck, putting them down, 1, 2, 3, we move on to the next hand. But it is certainly not the case. And there's a lot about Shadowhand, again, especially in the back half of the game, that things get very interesting from a design point of view. And I want to ask if you could elaborate a little bit more on how did you think about taking this design further, as in making a game that, again, from the outside looks very casual, and putting your finger on the needle and making it harder and more interesting.
Well, I knew from making Regency Solitaire that even though that sort of appears casual, that there were already loads of sort of like ways you could influence the outcome just by playing the cards, loads of little tips and tricks that you don't even notice for your first few hands, maybe you don't even notice towards the end of the game. So you develop a better solitaire technique after hundreds of hands of cards. And so I knew that existed, and I had already put power-ups into Regency Solitaire, so I knew how important they were and how important jokers were. So really my kind of thought was, hey, if I add more of that stuff that combine in interesting ways and make really interesting decisions, and then make sure that the fights aren't just generic fights, but they're like a puzzle in themselves. So each one has a different attack and defense, and therefore you've got to have a different loadout to optimize your chance of killing them. All of that was just extra layers that I kept sort of putting on top and testing, partly because I knew it would be more fun like that, but also I'm just a big fan of RPGs and wanted to get some of that stuff in the game, because I knew it would make for interesting decisions. So the stats in Shadowhand, the 6 attributes you can modify, those ones are in Regency Solitaire. You upgrade a ballroom with different objects and they all do different stuff. Some of those ballroom objects I realized were the sort of thing that weren't like, let's say you've got the owl card that lets you x-ray cards or not. It's just a one thing, you can't do anything else with it. But some of the items I realized you could apply a percentage to. So Insight, you can turn over 5% of cards or 10% of cards, and so I put those in as stats. I thought they were perfect because you can have 10 levels on each of them and gradually boost them. Of course, all of those have been very carefully balanced against each other and the other things in the game as well. You can't just randomly chuck a number in. That's why some of them have got 1% and some have got 10%, and they might seem like the 10% one's better, but it's not. And some of those I changed at the last minute. Prosperity was going to work differently, luck was going to work differently, and finesse didn't even exist until towards the end of the development. But not right at the end, just towards the end. And I tested them out and balanced them. Finesse, just certain things we realized wouldn't work. And the other important thing was I tried to make the stats work for puzzle hands and duels, both of them, because we could have had stats like health, strength, dexterity, like every other RPG, but we wanted to make them control the cards instead, because that is genuinely more interesting for this game. I don't know if that answered your question, but hopefully it was interesting.
Yeah, I think we're on the way there. I guess continuing with that, on talking more about the enemies themselves or the actual fights, how did you, what was like your overall philosophy for, again, we've said that it's about building it as a puzzle, but in terms of, designing things, in terms of balancing them out, making, this character resistant to bleed, but then the next character resistant to stun, what was your overall sense of development in terms of having these different fights?
Okay, so when we went through all the enemies, we did want to make them varied, but we even did stuff like looked at their clothing and thought, is it feasible we could give them this property or that property? Sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't. Or whether they're sea or land based, or if they're sort of sailors and pirates, or if they're sort of coachmen and highwaymen. So all of that and their characters added into what kind of stats we wanted to give them. And we obviously wanted to vary them, but I had to do other stuff like look at when you got certain weapons and defense items as loot or in the shop, and if you'd had them at that point in the game, and present you a challenge that would block some of them or allow some of them through. So it wasn't random. It had to be very carefully worked out so that the whole game you could progress through it, and that the challenges were fair if you made the right decisions. And that wasn't very easy. It's a whole big web of which I had to kind of keep in my head and use spreadsheets for and everything else.
And going back to what you said a few minutes ago, Jay, regarding grouping the weapons into various tiers, I think one very, explicit way, or how the game represents that, is with the defense value. As you go through the game, enemies' defenses are going to go higher and higher, and that's going to eat into a major part of your damage. So, for instance, on the stream last night, I was trying to use the stiletto that had 7 damage against an enemy who by default has 8 defense. Now, at that point, I wasn't going to do any damage with that weapon. And it's one of those things, as you said, that you have to be very careful about balancing, because let's say I get to a chapter and I'm using, group C weapons, but all the enemies' stats are balanced against group D. Well, I'm kind of in a very tough position at that point.
Yeah, you're screwed. But that's why we did stuff like introduce some of these higher tier weapons you'll get as loot from enemies. So you've got to beat them with a lower tier first, then you get the weapon and can go forward. And so basically the other weapons in the higher tier are optional in the shop. They're If you can get them, great, because they'll probably give you more options for the fights later. And it's also just style. Do you prefer a gun or a sword? What sort of, how do you want your character to look? But we had to make sure it was possible with the loot items, because forcing players to buy a thing,
Oh yes.
it would be not so good if they had the wrong thing. So yeah, all that had to be worked out. It is a complex web, this sort of thing. It's certainly not thrown together. I think some people do throw games together, and that's when you end up with problems. They don't feel balanced, they feel off.
Yeah, and again, as we said over the course of this part, like, there's a lot of balls you have to juggle with playing Shadowhand, that if things were just thrown in, randomly, the experience would be completely, broken for a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly. And I have played plenty of bad games over the years. I played bad solitaire games where they're just not fun, boring, there's no progression. So that's part of what I've been learning over 12 years of game dev, is to how to make a progression and how to fit it all together. But I've got to say, this game was a challenge. It was a big game for us, my wife and I, and it was a huge learning curve, but I feel that now I'm ready to tackle, complex projects going forwards.
Awesome. And
you just said going forwards with a straight face, didn't you, Jake?
Yes, I did.
Since you become famous and successful, you become so corporate.
That's why I have to say it's good. I have to reach out.
He sold out to the man. He sold out, Cliff.
Right. He has. He sold out. He's taken the evil publisher's dollar.
Quick question Mike asked in chat. Have you ever thought about streaming your development, or streaming as you're working on your game?
I guess I made developer vlogs along the way, but they're not streamed. I don't know how interesting it is. I mean, a lot of the time I'm just staring at code going, why doesn't this work, with bugs or whatever, or fiddling around in spreadsheets for like 8 hours in a row. So I just
it's really boring. I
think it can be really boring. What would be more interesting is listening to the design discussions that my wife and I had, perhaps, as we argue over whether this thing should be +1 or -1 or whatever. Design discussions are interesting, I think.
Oh, yeah.
But I think mostly programming is pretty freaking boring, especially spreadsheet stuff. I don't know.
Well, the thing is, you think it's boring because, I mean, I agree with you, obviously. It's incredibly boring. But, like, we do it. So it's, all the magic goes out of something when you do it for a living. And you kind of forget that it's kind of like your dream job. And I had this with music, that, it becomes a job. And you sort of think, oh God, why would we just go through this again? But like, then you forget you're in a recording studio or something, and it's exciting. But it's only exciting to people who don't get to do it all the time. So I agree with you. I think it's really boring to watch people develop a game. I mean, it just seems so tedious. But I guess, like, if you want to do that for a living and you haven't been able to yet, maybe it is interesting.
It could be. I mean, the other minor fear, is people go, "What the hell? That's terrible code. I'm not going to buy your game." Or something like that. Okay.
Well, this is the other thing. I mean, like, I sometimes tweet about stuff that's like technical, and I think, who open sources their code? Because everyone, including people who are just wrong and who just don't know what it is that you're doing or why you're doing it, will say, "You've written that bit of code wrong." And it's that would be awful, I think.
Maybe I could. I mean, I have got myself a decent microphone and webcam, and I've got this OBS thing. Maybe I can try it in the future.
That all the kids are using.
I know, yeah. Exactly, yeah. Maybe I could try it in the future. We'll see. Who knows? As I said, I think design decisions would be more fun, or me and Cliff ranting about the industry might be more fun.
Well, I can always have you guys back on. We can do some more rants whenever you guys are free.
You see, like, even Josh says rant.
It's sorry.
Rant. It's rant, Jay.
I say rant like Hugh Grant. See. But
it isn't. Nobody pronounces it like that except you. You're the only person alive. We had a poll. You remember this on Twitter, and nobody agreed with you. And then it turned out the only person who agreed with you was your wife.
No, there was a few people agreed. More than
they
zero.
They were mocking you.
More than zero, Cliff.
Okay, just say
rant. So. Okay, there we go.
Even people who say Mitch say, what is the word we're talking about?
Itch.io. Itch.io?
Oh, itch.io.
What do you say? How do you say it? Itch.io, I think, anyway.
We're turning this into a grammar podcast, folks.
Sorry.
I think that's a good move, Josh.
Yeah.
I think that's what we should do.
We're not going to talk about game design. We're just going to talk about the structural grammar for the next hour and a half.
I think so.
Oscar actually brought up a question I was going to ask, but just for people who may be listening, regarding bringing Shadowhand to other platforms, you just said that probably not on mobile, but you're thinking about console, correct?
Not necessarily thinking about it. It's more that if the right deal came up with a publisher or something, and there was a willingness, and they had a decent team, and we're going to pay for the whole thing, and we thought it was viable, maybe. The thing with ports is, even if someone else does all the work, at the end of the day, there's two things. One, they could do a bad job and you'll be embarrassed about it, or they misinterpret some element of the game, and two, you've got to basically test that port, at least if you care about it, which I would. And that is time consuming, and if you're trying to work on another project, it's very distracting having to turn yourself into a super QA person and test it all and send back lists of sort of problems, and then you get it back and only half of them have been fixed and you go over it again. I've done this before, you can tell, with like mobile ports, and it's kind of soul destroying, and I'd rather just make a new game and move on in many ways, but I'm not ruling it out at the end of the day. But probably with mobile, for various reasons, technical and sort of market wise and all sorts, really. And then,
I was going to say there is a surprising amount of bureaucratic nonsense involved with consoles. I mean, that's one of the beauties of PC. Like, we don't need a license or anything to sell a game on a PC. Anyone can do it anywhere in the world without permission or approval or like any of the kind of like legal nonsense. Whereas with consoles, that's completely different.
Yeah, it's unlikely, but you never know. I don't want to rule these things out.
All right. So, again, I mean, we could sit here and chat all night long, but I think there's like a 5-hour delay where you guys are compared to where I'm at here on the East Coast. So.
Oh, yeah, it's nearly 10 p.m. and Cliff needs more alcohol.
I haven't had anything to drink at all. I'm saving myself because I'm seeing Star Wars tomorrow night and I'm going to have cocktails beforehand.
Nice.
Oh, okay.
There you go. So I better let you guys go in the next few minutes. But again, there's a lot more we can talk about, and I'm sure we can certainly have you guys back on in the future. But to wrap things up for today, I guess here are my final set of questions, and I guess we're officially past the point for design questions for the chat. So I guess the first one I have, and I'm sure you probably have thought about this by now, are there any plans or any thoughts on post-release content for Shadowhand if it does well enough?
Maybe. It's just a maybe. If it has to do well enough. If it does well enough, it becomes a no-brainer financially to do so. I know some people would like this to be a living game, constantly updated and so on, but that's only... There's a reality of developers and whether they can afford to do that. And if we can afford to do it and it makes sense, we'll do so. But it may make sense for us to pivot and do something else. And ultimately, we have to sort of do that, what's best for our business and therefore our family. So it's just a big maybe at the moment. Basically, get enough sales and we'll do it.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. I'm going to have my review up probably either today or tomorrow on the game. I would like to see at least more on the RPG side of things, like see that fleshed out. Because as I said earlier, like for people who just stop playing the game around, chapter 2 or 3, they really don't get to see the full breadth of your choices when you get to that back half, or even just the halfway point. Oscar just said you can add multiplayer. Yeah.
That is quite a problem for games like this, because I think because it's a completely new meshing of genres, people kind of like don't know what to expect. And you think like if you played like the latest Call of Duty game, and then after the bit when you're in a like training level and it teaches you how to go forwards and backwards and jump, if you then thought, no, this game sucks, I haven't even shot anyone yet, that would be ridiculous, because everyone knows like you're eased into the mechanics. But everyone's got so used to the mechanics of established games that they kind of forget that is a thing. And because this is a completely new way of putting genres together, it has to have that, and you have to like go through that to like really get to the sort of meat and potatoes of the game. So hopefully people will realise that. I mean, almost everyone does. It's just the occasional person who bounces off it because of that.
Mm-hmm. We're just having a really great chat right now. Oh, this is even great. I'm trying to concentrate on you guys talking on the chat and trying to do all this multitasking, but that's what we do here. There we go. But yeah, it's very tricky. I would agree with you, Cliff, about again when you have these very interesting games, because we've talked about this many times over. I mean, hell, we could easily turn this into its own discussion, but about how much do you really show the player right from the get-go? Like, you run the risk of overwhelming them, or you run the risk that they don't get to the actual meat of the experience. Like, I was thinking about this earlier, but as you said a few minutes ago, Jake, regarding balancing out the weapon unlocks, like, there is a set and structured order to what gear unlocks when. I mean, it would be great if you start Shadowhand, you have, 2 full pages of gear all ready to use and make use of. But then you run the risk of someone brand new loading that game up, seeing it, and just, going complete deer in the headlights and going, what the hell am I supposed to do here?
Yeah, for sure. So I've gone for the sort of nice on-ramp and gradual expansion, which I think yields a better player experience, but it will bounce people off who think it's too simple at the beginning. And I don't really see a way around that, really. So, and especially as it's quite a new concept, the solitaire and combat. So I didn't want to confuse people with too much stuff. And we may have fans of Regency who are coming to it, who are more casual players, and I wanted to get them into the concept as well, not lose them at the first hurdle. So, maybe we've done it wrong. Maybe I could have put a few more things in earlier and sped it up a bit more. I don't know. It's too late now, really.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, it has been great talking to you. I'm sure we could probably sit here and chat even more, but I think it's time to wrap things up. And again, I'm really enjoying Shadowhand. I'll probably do a few more streams of it if you guys want to come on and mock me while I'm making bad decisions and putting the wrong card down on the table.
Cool. Well, I'm glad.
We're not sure we got all the answers, have we? Do you really know? It's.
I can definitely sometimes spot other people's mistakes, but if I was to play it, they'd probably spot mine. I think it's like that, really. I think it is quite complex, but I'm really glad you are enjoying it, Josh, and I appreciate you streaming it, and hope you get to do some more. And thanks for having us on the show.
Yeah.
No problem. It was great hanging out with you guys, and like I said, you guys, if you are free in the future, and we won't have another talk about grammar or throwing soap at dogs, it'll be great to have you guys back on.
Only if the podcast is titled "Grammar and Throwing Soap at Dogs."
There we go. That will, for a marketing point of view, that's how we pull the kids in. That's how we get the young folks to come watch us talk right there.
That's what they want. They're all throwing soap at dogs these days.
Exactly. But let's wrap things up here. So again, for you guys watching this live or recorded, be sure to check out Shadowhand. It is currently available on Steam. Is it on GOG right now?
It is. And Humble Store as well.
Awesome.
And direct from the publisher, which is actually the best way to get it, because you get a DRM-free version and a Steam key, and we get more money. So that's
so you get our
actually
gratitude and love.
Yes,
it is. But I know I'm being really slack there. I should have mentioned that. Well done, Jake. It's late.
It's all right, publisher.
Cliff's not being a good publisher, Jake. Now the tables have turned.
Yeah, time to readjust the percentages.
It's bad. This is not a discussion we have on live stream.
There we go. But be sure to check out Shadowhand, and of course be sure to follow Jake and Cliff. If they want to follow you guys on Twitter, what are your respective handles?
Oh, I type it in here. It's Grey Alien. I am.
I'm Cliffsky.
Grey Alien with an E. I don't know if you Americans spell it different. That's a time for another chat.
That's for the grammar
roll
chat.
That into our grammar podcast, Joe.
Exactly. Let's just segue into that right now. Let's just have another 2-hour chat on grammar. I'm sure everyone watching would love to hang out there. But be sure to check them out. I will probably be posting a new player's guide to Shadowhand. For those of you watching this recorded, it should be up on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel. For you guys watching live, it should be in a few days. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in. If you're new, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to get access to an ad-free version of this chat early, be sure to subscribe to patreon.com/gwbicer. You'll also get access to our private Discord channel, game voting, and more. But that is going to do it for tonight. So again, guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me. Let's certainly do this again when you guys have been rested after, the post-release craziness.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, everyone. See you around.
Yep. Thank you, and goodbye, people.
Alright, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to mention, but I think that is going to do it. For you guys watching this live, this archive will be going up probably in a week, unless you are a Patreon VIP supporter. That will go up earlier, and I'll probably be doing a game stream later tonight, so be sure to check that out. But otherwise, thanks again for tuning in. I'm sure we'll be talking again in the future, and again, have a good evening, and see you all next time.